I never imagined that the person who changed everything in my life would be my son's best friend. What started as a simple ride turned into a moment that shattered everything I thought I knew about myself. It didn't start with anything dramatic. It wasn't some scandalous setup or wild temptation. It was just a ride. A simple, innocent ride. But it's always the small things, isn't it? The quiet, everyday moments that slip under your skin and stay there. That day, I wasn't thinking about anything except getting home. I wasn't dressed up. I wasn't looking for attention. I was tired. My heart was heavy. My spirit even heavier. He offered to pick me up. Just being kind. At least, that's what I told myself. But the way he looked at me when I got in the car, it wasn't how anyone had looked at me in a long, long time. Not like I was a mother. Not like I was married. Just a woman. It caught me off guard. And for a second, I forgot who I was supposed to be. It made me realize how long it had been since I felt seen. Really seen. Not just someone keeping the house running. Not just someone filling the silence at dinner. But me. I'd spent years feeling invisible. I don't say that lightly. I mean really invisible, like I could disappear and no one would notice. And when someone finally does notice you, even if they shouldn't, it hits different. It shakes something loose inside you. I wasn't looking for it. I wasn't planning anything. But something in me woke up that day. Something I thought was gone. And that ride home, that short, quiet drive, changed everything. What happened next? I never saw coming. And once it started, there was no going back. Before I share what happened, don't forget to subscribe to Shocking Infidelity Saga so you won't miss out on our next story, where we tell real stories that reveal the deepest parts of the human heart. And if you've ever felt unseen or misunderstood, give this video a like. I just need you to know, this wasn't about lust. This was about loneliness. About what happens when you spend so long feeling numb that the first spark you feel becomes impossible to ignore. And that spark? It lit a fire I couldn't put out. The spark lit something in me I hadn't felt in years, but it didn't start there. It started long before that ride. Long before Ethan looked at me the way no one had in years. Let me take you back. I'm 46, married for over 2 decades. And if you asked anyone on the outside, they'd say I have a good life. A beautiful house in a quiet neighborhood. A successful husband. A son in college. From the outside, it looks picture perfect. But you know how pictures lie. They freeze a moment and hide everything else. Inside that house, I felt like a ghost. I wasn't always like this. I used to have a spark. I used to laugh without checking who was listening. I used to be playful, spontaneous, full of light. But over time, that version of me faded. Not all at once, slowly. Piece by piece. Word by word. Silence by silence. My husband, Mark, is a good provider. He always has been. He works hard, he's respected, and I don't doubt that he once loved me. But somewhere along the way, he stopped seeing me. Stopped reaching for me. Stopped asking how I felt or what I wanted. Our conversations became calendars. Grocery lists. Bills. Our bed became just a place to sleep. And the few times he did touch me, it felt more like obligation than desire. Months would go by without intimacy. And I stopped asking why. You'd think I'd say something. You'd think I'd scream or cry or demand more. But when it happens slowly, you don't realize how empty you've become until someone offers to fill even a small part of it. My son, Liam, is 21. He's sweet. A good kid. Smart. But like most young adults, he's in his own world. College, friends, work. He calls when he remembers. And when he's home, he's in and out, hugging me on the way to somewhere else. I don't blame him. It's just how life goes. But Ethan was different. He and Liam have been best friends since they were 12. They grew up together, spent weekends at our house, watched movies in our living room, had sleepovers and late-night snacks in the kitchen. I watched Ethan grow from a lanky, quiet boy into this calm, confident young man. After high school, he moved away for a bit. College, internships, life. But recently, he came back. He had that same charm, but there was something more now. He carried himself like a man, spoke with thought, listened, really listened. And every now and then, when we'd talk, I'd catch this flicker in his eyes. Not disrespectful, not inappropriate, just present. He looked at me like I mattered. And in a house where I felt like furniture, that simple look was everything. The first time I noticed it, I brushed it off. I told myself I was imagining things, projecting, but it kept happening. Subtle, quiet, like he saw right through the shell I'd become. The house we lived in was spotless. I kept it that way. My way of staying useful, staying in control. But it always felt cold. Like the walls had memorized every argument, every silence. Warm summer light would stream through the windows, but it didn't touch anything real. It just highlighted the distance. Mark would come home late, drop his keys on the counter, kiss my cheek without looking. And I'd smile like it didn't sting. But Ethan would come over and ask how I was. Not in passing. Not as a formality. He'd pause. Wait for the answer. He'd help me carry groceries in without being asked. He'd sit at the kitchen counter while I made coffee and ask about things I didn't even realize I'd mentioned before. Little things. Like the book I was reading. Or the garden I said I wanted to start but never did. And somehow, that felt more intimate than anything I'd had in years. I started looking forward to his visits. Started finding reasons to be in the room when he came over. I told myself it was nothing. That I was just being polite. Friendly. But deep down, I knew. I was starving for attention. Starving for warmth. I wasn't blind. I knew there was an unspoken line. I also knew I was getting dangerously close to it. That summer, everything felt slow. The air was heavy. The kind that clings to your skin. Birds chirped outside while the inside of the house remained silent. Mark and I were like roommates. Liam was rarely home. And in that space, Ethan's presence filled a void I didn't even know I was still aching to have filled. Looking back, I wonder if things were already in motion long before I realized. Maybe something in me was waiting. Waiting for someone to see me, hear me, want me. And Ethan. He saw everything. Even the parts one tried to hide. And that's where the danger began. It was a rainy Saturday. The kind of rain that comes out of nowhere. Thick, heavy, relentless. I had only gone out for a few things, just some groceries and time away from the silence at home. Mark was out of town for a business conference. Liam had left earlier that morning for a weekend trip with friends. So it was just me. I remember sitting in the driver's seat, engine sputtering, windshield wipers fighting against the downpour. My car had never given me trouble before, but that day, it just gave up. Right there, in the middle of the store parking lot. I tried calling Mark. Straight to voicemail. Of course. Tried a few friends. No answer. Then, without even thinking, I scrolled through my phone and landed on a name I didn't expect to tap. Ethan. I hesitated. Stared at the screen. My finger hovered. It felt silly. It felt inappropriate. But I was soaked, frustrated, and alone. So I called. His voice was warm, relaxed, like he'd been waiting for something to do. No hesitation, no questions. Just, I'm on my way. 15 minutes later, he pulled up beside me in his truck. He jumped out with an umbrella, jacket already damp, and jogged over to my door. And for a second, I just sat there, watching him through the rain-speckled window. The way he moved. The way he smiled. So sure. So present. I opened the door and stepped out, and as I reached for the umbrella, his hand brushed mine. It was the smallest thing. Barely a second. But I felt it. And I know he did too. We both froze for a moment. Not because we meant to. Because something in that tiny contact, skin against skin, warmth in the middle of all that cold rain, said something we hadn't said out loud. He looked at me. Really looked. And I looked back. I pulled my hand away a moment too late. Just enough for it to mean something. And neither of us spoke about it. The ride home was quiet at first. The kind of quiet that hums in your chest. Soft music played from the speakers. Something low and jazzy. I remember the sound of the rain tapping against the windows, the way the warmth of the car felt too intimate. Like we'd stepped into a different world. A bubble where no one else existed. He asked if I was okay. I said I was fine. Then we both laughed, because clearly I wasn't. And for the first time in I don't know how long, it felt good to laugh. It was easy, being with him. Natural. He talked about school, life, how weird it was being back in town. I talked about small things. The garden I never planted. A recipe I messed up the night before. He laughed. I laughed. And the space between us started to shrink. Not physically, emotionally. The way his eyes lingered. The way he smiled when I spoke. It felt like something was unfolding slowly, delicately, between us. There was no rush. No grand declaration. Just a tension. A pull. And when we got to the house, he walked me to the door. Still raining. Still quiet. I reached for the keys. He stood beside me, holding the umbrella above us both. So close I could feel the heat coming off his skin. And that moment, under that shared umbrella, with water dripping around us, silence hanging heavy in the air. It felt like the world had slowed down just to watch us. Neither of us moved. Neither of us said anything. Then, just as quickly, I unlocked the door. Stepped inside. Closed it behind me. I leaned against it for a second, heart racing. He didn't knock. He didn't linger. But something had changed. Not just in the air, in me. It was like I'd been holding my breath for years, and someone had finally given me a reason to exhale. I told myself to forget it. That it was nothing. Just a weird moment, brought on by a long day and too much rain. But deep down, I knew. Something shifted in the air that day. And I tried to ignore it, but it only grew stronger. After that rainy day, things didn't exactly go back to normal. At least, not for me. I started noticing Ethan more. Not in a deliberate, scheming kind of way. But in the quiet moments. The moments I used to overlook. The way he looked at me when I spoke, like I was saying something worth hearing. The way his eyes stayed on me just a second too long. The way he didn't scroll through his phone or glance around the room like he was waiting for something more interesting to happen. He was just present. With me. And that was rare. Unfamiliar. Mark barely looked up from his laptop anymore. Even when we ate dinner together, if we ate together, it was mostly silence or shallow small talk that floated between us like smoke. Nothing ever settled. Nothing ever landed. But Ethan, he listened. He asked follow-up questions. He remembered things I said in passing and brought them up later like they mattered. And at first, I told myself it was harmless. He was just being kind. Just friendly. He was like a second son, after all. That's what I told myself. But the truth? The truth was, it felt good. It felt like sunlight on skin that hadn't seen warmth in years. I caught myself looking forward to the sound of the doorbell, hoping it was him. I'd fix my hair without thinking, choose softer colors, spritz a little perfume even if I wasn't going anywhere. Then I'd catch myself doing those things and feel this sharp stab of guilt, followed by something even more dangerous. A flicker of justification. He's an adult. He's not a child. He's grown, mature, kind. And I've been alone in this marriage for years. Does that make this wrong, or just human? That's the question that haunted me. I kept trying to convince myself that it was all in my head. That nothing had happened. That nothing would happen. But then I'd remember how his hand felt against mine, even just for a second. And I couldn't stop wondering if he remembered it too. I started having dreams. Nothing explicit. Just intimate. Vivid, the kind of dreams where he'd say things Mark never did. Where I'd wake up feeling something in my chest that made me want to cry. I felt crazy. Embarrassed. Like some foolish housewife chasing a fantasy she had no business entertaining. But the more I tried to push it away, the more it lingered. Every silence with Mark felt louder. Every dismissive comment stung sharper. There was a night, I'll never forget it, I asked Mark if he wanted to take a walk after dinner. The weather was perfect. Clear skies. Warm breeze. Just the kind of evening we used to enjoy. He barely looked up. Said he was tired. Said maybe next week. then went back to checking emails. I just stood there in the kitchen, holding 2 empty coffee mugs, heart sinking in my chest like I'd been foolish for even asking. And that was the moment something in me cracked. I realized I'd been waiting for something that wasn't coming back. Waiting for him to notice me, to fight for me, to love me like he used to. But he didn't. And maybe he never would. So when Ethan looked at me a little too long, I didn't look away. When he complimented my smile, I let it land. When he offered to stay and help clean up after dinner, I didn't stop him. I kept telling myself, this isn't a betrayal. Nothing's happened. But in my heart, something was happening. Something real. Something dangerous. And still, I didn't want it to stop. I should have known better. I did know better. But I'd been numb for so long, and suddenly I could feel again. That's what scared me the most. Not the risk. Not the judgment. But how alive he made me feel, and how desperately I didn't want that feeling to end. After that rainy day, after that moment in the car, things didn't exactly become clearer. If anything, the lines blurred even more. Ethan started coming by more often. At first, it was always for Liam. He'd swing by to drop something off or ask about weekend plans. But when Liam wasn't home, he'd stay and chat anyway. Then it became little things. He'd bring me coffee, my exact order. The one I used to get with Mark years ago, before our mornings became separate. He'd help me carry in groceries without being asked. Fix the loose cabinet door that had been hanging crooked for months. How hard it was to feel seen when you're always the one holding it all together. And I told him the truth. Not all of it, but enough. That my marriage hadn't felt like a marriage in years. That I didn't remember the last time Mark held me just because. That I sometimes stared at the ceiling at night, wondering if this was all life had left for me. We didn't touch. We didn't move closer. But in that moment, we were bare. Emotionally stripped. No guards. No roles. Just 2 people, aching. It became a pattern after that. Little visits. Short conversations that turned into long ones. He'd find excuses to stop by. I'd find excuses to let him. One night, Mark was away again. A conference somewhere. I didn't bother asking where. The rain had returned. Heavy this time. A storm rolled in just after dinner, taking the power with it. The house went dark. Just the soft glow of candles scattered through the rooms. Ethan had come by to return a book Liam left in his car, but the storm trapped him. Or maybe it didn't. Maybe we both let it. We sat in the living room. Just us. A single candle flickering between us on the coffee table. I poured 2 glasses of wine. Red. Warm. Comforting. He told me more about his past. About the things he never shared with anyone else. I told him things I hadn't even said out loud to myself. There was something in the silence between our words that said more than we ever dared to say. I noticed how close he was sitting. How steady his gaze was. How his voice dropped when he said my name. I felt it. In my chest. In my stomach. Everywhere. A slow, unbearable pull. Then it happened. Not a kiss. Not quite. But the almost. He leaned in, just a little. Our faces close enough that I could feel the warmth of his breath. And for a moment, I didn't move. I wanted to. God, I wanted to. But something in me said no. Not yet. I pulled back. Not far. Just enough. And I whispered, you should go. But when I said it, he didn't move. He just looked at me. And in that pause, in that hesitation, I felt it all. The weight of what hadn't happened. The ache of what might. The truth that we were already too far gone to pretend this was nothing. I told him he should go. But when he hesitated, a part of me wanted him to stay. It was a week later. The days in between passed in a haze, too quiet, too loud, all at once. I kept replaying that night in my mind. The candlelight, the wine, the closeness, the almost. Every glance we shared afterward carried that weight. That unfinished feeling. Like we were both walking through the world holding a breath we couldn't release. Then one afternoon, he texted me. Just a simple, need anything from the store? I'm heading out. I stared at the screen for longer than I should have. I could have said no. I should have said no. But instead, I typed, actually, yes. Could you pick me up? I need to grab a few things. He showed up 10 minutes later. Same smile. Same steady eyes. But the air between us? It was different. Charged. We didn't talk much on the way there. Just casual small talk, little laughs. But underneath it, I could feel the tension humming, just beneath the surface. Every silence felt like something unsaid. We picked up the groceries. It was nothing, and yet, it felt like everything. On the way back, he didn't drive straight home. Instead, he turned off the main road and headed toward the hills. I didn't ask why. I knew exactly where he was going. There's this scenic overlook just outside town, trees on either side, a wide open view of the valley below. Liam used to bring his friends there in high school. I hadn't been in years. He parked. We sat in silence for a moment. The sun was low, gold spilling across the dashboard. It felt like time had slowed, or maybe we were just outside of it altogether. Then, without looking at me, he said, "We can't keep pretending nothing's happening." I didn't answer. He turned to me. Eyes steady. Voice calm. "I've always felt something for you. Even when I was younger. I didn't understand it then. I just knew you made me feel safe. Seen." He paused, then added, "And now, it's more than that." I wanted to speak, but the words caught in my throat. All I could feel was this wave rising inside me, grief, guilt, hunger, need. No one had said something like that to me in so long. Not with truth behind it. Not with eyes that didn't look through me. I was tired of pretending I wasn't starving. So I broke. I leaned in. No hesitation this time. And I kissed him. It wasn't sweet. It wasn't gentle. It was everything I'd been holding back for years. It was desperate. It was messy. It was the kind of kiss that feels like breaking through the surface after drowning for far too long. His hands held my face like I was something fragile and burning all at once. And I let go. Of everything. The years of silence. The nights I cried in secret. The rejection. The ache. The loneliness that had wrapped itself around my bones like ivy. All of it poured into that moment. Into him. We didn't say much afterward. We didn't have to. What passed between us wasn't just physical. It was emotional. Soul deep. We sat there for a long time. He held my hand. I leaned my head against his shoulder. And the sun dipped below the horizon like it was trying to hide us from the rest of the world. I can't tell you where the line was anymore. All I know is, we crossed it. And there was no going back. In that moment, I felt alive again. Seen, desired, wanted, and completely broken, all at once. The next morning, everything felt heavier. I woke up and the world looked the same, but I wasn't. There was this thick, aching quiet in the air, like the aftermath of a storm that had torn through but left no visible wreckage. Just the mess inside. I couldn't eat. Couldn't focus. I kept going over what had happened in the car at the overlook. The way he held me. The way I let him. The way I didn't want it to end. I didn't know what to do next. There wasn't a rule book for something like this. No script to follow. Just me, and this mess I'd willingly stepped into. My phone buzzed. It was Ethan. "Are you okay?" Just 3 words. But they carried so much weight. I stared at the screen, heart pounding. I typed a reply. Erased it. Typed again. Deleted it. In the end, I said nothing. I couldn't. The guilt was starting to crawl its way up my throat. I couldn't breathe right. Couldn't sit still. So I stayed busy. Cleaned the house twice. Did laundry that didn't need doing. Anything to keep from feeling the truth of what I'd done. Then, Liam came home. He walked in like he always did, loud, full of stories, carrying snacks and laundry. And for a moment I forgot. Until he said it. "Ethan's been acting weird. Like, really weird. Did something happen?" My hands froze mid-folding. I looked up, too quickly. "What do you mean?" I asked. He shrugged. "I dunno. Just quiet. Fidgety. Not like himself." I forced a smile. Forced a laugh that sounded nothing like me. "Maybe he's just tired." Liam nodded, already moving on. But I stood there, clothes in my hands, stomach twisting into knots. I avoided Ethan after that. Didn't reply to his texts. Didn't answer when he called. I told myself I needed space. That I needed to think. But really, I was terrified. Not of him. Of what I was starting to feel. I tried to go back to normal. Whatever normal even meant at that point. But everything felt off. Food tasted dull. Music felt hollow. Even my own reflection looked like someone else. Someone carrying a secret too big to hide. Then came the dinner. Mark suggested it, out of nowhere. Let's have a little get-together. Liam's back. I'm actually home. Maybe invite Ethan too. It's been a while since we all sat down together. I felt my heart sink. I wanted to say no. To make up a reason, an excuse, anything. But I didn't. Because that's what I do. I smile. I nod. I go along. The night of the dinner, I wore a pale blue dress. Not too much. Simple. Safe. But my hands wouldn't stop shaking while I did my makeup. I felt like I was walking into a minefield with a blindfold on. When Ethan arrived, I could barely look at him. But I felt him. The second he stepped through the door, the air shifted. I forced a hello. He gave a quiet smile. Polite. Careful. We didn't speak beyond pleasantries. But the eye contact across the room, it was enough. It said everything we couldn't. I sat at the table beside Mark, across from Ethan. Liam joked about school, Mark poured wine, and I laughed when I was supposed to. Then Mark, in his usual oblivious way, chuckled and said, "You know, sometimes I think Ethan comes over more to see you than Liam." I froze. Ethan went still too. And I laughed. This hollow, brittle laugh that sounded like it belonged to someone else. "Don't be ridiculous," I said, reaching for my glass too fast, nearly knocking it over. No one noticed. Except Ethan. His eyes never left mine, and for the rest of the meal, I could feel the weight of it pressing down on me. Every glance. Every half-smile. Every word I couldn't say out loud. After dessert, I excused myself. Went into the kitchen, hands gripping the counter. I stared at the sink. At the dishes. At the life I had built, and the pieces of myself I'd lost inside it. Behind me, I could hear the laughter of my family. The man who didn't see me. The son who trusted me. And the boy who now carried part of my soul in silence. If only he knew. If any of them knew. What would happen next? I didn't know. But I could feel the ground starting to shift beneath my feet. What have I done? That question has lived in my chest ever since that night in the car. Since that kiss. Since I let a part of myself escape that I had locked away for years. Was I just lonely, or was I selfish? I've asked myself that more times than I can count. It echoes in the silence when I wake up too early. In the sound of the dishwasher running late at night. In the way Mark touches my shoulder out of habit, not affection. In the way Liam hugs me goodbye, still clueless, still trusting. I remember being young. I remember believing love would be enough to sustain everything. That if you gave your whole heart, the other person would protect it like their own. But life, it wears you down. It chips away at your softness until you don't recognize the reflection looking back at you. You become practical. You become responsible. And you forget that you were once someone who wanted to be touched just because. Kissed without reason. Wanted deeply wholly. I never set out to betray anyone. I just wanted to feel alive again. Is that such a terrible thing? But then the guilt comes. And it is relentless. Should I confess? Would it even fix anything? Or would it just tear more apart? Would Mark look at me like I was a stranger? Would Liam ever speak to me again? And what about Ethan? Ethan, who looked at me like I was still someone. Ethan, who held my hand like it meant something. Ethan, who touched me in a way that made me feel like I still had a heart beating in my chest. But what future was there in any of it? We met one final time. I texted him late one afternoon. Said I needed to talk. He came over without hesitation. We sat in the backyard. It was quiet. The kind of quiet that presses down on you. I couldn't look at him for the longest time. Then he spoke first. "Are you okay?" I nodded, even though I wasn't. He waited. I told him everything. Not in detail. Just the truth of it. That I couldn't breathe with the guilt pressing down on me. That I didn't regret what we shared, but I didn't know how to live with it either. He didn't interrupt. Just listened. Like always. Then he said, I meant it. Everything I said. I don't regret any of it. But if you need me to walk away, I will. And I broke again. Not in a passionate way. Not in desperation. But quietly. In surrender. I told him I didn't know what the right thing was anymore. I told him I didn't want to hurt him. Or myself. Or my family. But I also didn't want to pretend like none of it meant anything. He reached out. Took my hand. You don't have to pretend, he said. Not with me. We sat like that for a while. Saying everything we couldn't out loud. Letting the silence hold our goodbye. When he finally stood to leave, I didn't stop him. And he didn't ask me to. I watched him walk away with a part of me still wrapped around his name. And as the sun dipped below the fence line, I whispered to no one. Maybe in another life, but not this one. And I meant it. Even if it shattered me. I didn't plan for this. I didn't wake up one morning and decide to cross a line I swore I never would. I didn't expect to feel anything again. Not like that. Not so deep it shook loose everything I thought I'd buried. But now, I live with the weight of that one decision. It follows me into rooms where no one knows. It sits beside me during family dinners. It lingers in the pause before I speak, in the glance I can't hold too long, in the smile I fake when someone asks how I'm doing. And I keep wondering, if I could undo it, would I? Because for one brief, fleeting moment, I felt alive. I felt like me again. Not the forgotten wife. Not the silent partner. But a woman who still had something inside her worth being wanted. Was it wrong? Maybe. Was it real? Absolutely. And now, I turn to you. Because I don't have the answers. What would you have done in my shoes? Was it just loneliness, or something deeper? Was it a moment of weakness, or a moment of truth? Tell me in the comments. Not to judge. Not to justify. But to be honest. Because if you've ever felt unseen, if you've ever longed for something you couldn't name, then maybe, just maybe, you'll understand. And if this story resonated with you, even a little, please like this video. And subscribe to Shocking Infidelity Saga, where every week, we explore the raw truth behind love, betrayal, and everything in between. We don't tell perfect stories. We tell real ones. The kind that don't always end with closure. The kind that live on in the silence after the door closes. In the space between what we want and what we choose. Sometimes the heart doesn't betray us. It just reveals what we've buried for too long. The longing, the ache, the truth we were too afraid to speak. But the choices we make in those moments, they define us. Forever.